Thank you. Eminence, Excellence, distinguished friends and colleagues, the two academies, founded 400 years apart, have come together and worked extremely productively on sustainable development and the common good, and the key element, the dignity of the human person. In addition to that, Pope Francis himself gave the Academy of Social Sciences a personal brief. He asked us in a now famous little handwritten note, please examine the question of human trafficking, including the trafficking in organs. Now, this may sound discreet, and I don't want to exaggerate the connections, but there are indeed connections between human trafficking and climate change. When we talk about human trafficking today, to the best of our knowledge, and our knowledge we freely admit is defective, there are between 20 and 30 million trafficked persons in the world. We are talking about an industry whose profits run at $160 million, almost challenging the profits that are derived from the equally obnoxious trafficking and sale of drugs. So, what is this connection, which is not of the strongest, but it is there? It concerns human movement and the very commonsensical notion that were the climate change to register an increase above 2 degrees Celsius, progressively we would see more and more human movement. In other words, the linkage is what Aristotle would have called one of the material causes of human trafficking, meaning that as the temperature rises, and we hope, of course, fervently that it does not, but as it does so, even fractionally, life becomes unsustainable for some of the poorest. In a country, and in particular areas within a country, there are forms of life that are unsustainable for the poor people in question. Fishing, we have had admirable evidence about the depletion of fish stocks and fish forms. Hunting and food gathering for those who are poorest and worst off are still means that enable them to live. Not well, but to live. Small-scale cultivation is crucial to many of the poorest. It does not yield them a balanced diet or a rich diet, but a diet that can be lived upon. All of that will change if we undergo temperature rise. And that will mean that this much overworked word, vulnerability, will increase. But it's vulnerability always to something. And what the poor and worst off will become more vulnerable to is human trafficking. Because they do not know how to move. This is a skill. It involves social networks, social relations. It's not something that people do alone or usually unaided. Secondly, we have quite sufficient evidence to be able to say that where there is considerable socio-political conflict in the world, this too precipitates and intensifies human trafficking. How does that work? Well, let's just look very briefly at the former Soviet Union, where the poor entered into a position of unsustainable wages, wages that simply could not buy them the basics, pay the necessary utilities, public utilities, high unemployment, and again, the reaction was to move. But who suffers worst from moving in a way that depends upon the traffickers? The poor. The most poor, because they are not educated, they do not have their network of contacts in other parts of the world who can advise them, who may even welcome them, who may make life easier for them by providing temporary accommodation, temporary job placement, and so on. And therefore, it's the poor again who suffer most and fall into the hands of the traffickers. And we can see how rapidly this happens. Thirdly, if we look at a small, very sad country, Moldova, sad because neither the East nor the West decided to take any kind of care for it whatsoever. And Moldova became one of the hubs, to use the airport analogy, of human trafficking. Amazingly, within very, very few years, forging links with the mafioso in all sorts of countries. And so these are not the most profound or closest links, but climate change, the disruption it involves, and population movements and susceptibility to trafficking are connected. What we hope in the Academy of Social Sciences is that we have moved the agenda forward on human trafficking, that we are no longer satisfied with national legislation which is required by all countries that ratify the Palermo Protocol of the United Nations. We are no longer satisfied with a political response which is based upon repatriation. Based upon it because what they seek to do is to criminalize the traffickers and then to repatriate the trafficked victims. We acknowledge, of course, that some people will voluntarily wish to return to their countries of origin. But those small numbers of studies that have been done on the qualitative aspect, not the numerical aspect of human trafficking, have shown that many want to stay in the host countries to which they have moved. And so, in conclusion, I think our academy, in wanting to move towards talking not about repatriation, but about resettlement, about how to have a new life in a new land without becoming a stranger in a strange country, this will involve, as you will see this afternoon when I hand out the recommendations from our large plenary meeting on trafficking that took place right here 1 week ago, that we are actually starting to do a form of investigation, exploration that will be necessary if indeed our one Earth does succumb to a significant rise in temperature, even before we hit this intolerable limit of 4 degrees Celsius. So what we hope to be doing is to be providing something on the human side of the equation, how people move, why they move, where they move, and how, in order to help restore and preserve, because human dignity can never ultimately be lost, but how we can help this to be enjoyed once more, once again, by those people who have sadly become the victims of this crime against humanity, which is human trafficking and results in modern slavery. Thank you.